When my dad died, my mom told me there was no will, then handed everything to my sister, including the mansion I grew up in. I was left with nothing. No home, no money, not even a photo. They thought I'd disappear, but what they didn't know was that I'd spend the next few years becoming something they never saw coming. And believe me, I made sure they paid for every inch of the land they stole from me. My name is Madison, and for most of my life, I thought I was destined to inherit the land I loved more than anything in the world. I grew up in Montana on a massive ranch that stretched farther than the eye could see. We had horses, cattle, a red barn that looked like it came straight out of a painting, and fields that changed color with the seasons. Our house, well mansion, really sat right in the middle of it all. It was 3 stories of creaking floors, old family portraits, and fireplaces that crackled in the winter. It wasn't just a home, it was a legacy, one I thought would always be mine to protect. Being the oldest daughter, I was the one who cared. I learned how to mend fences with Dad, how to rotate crops, and manage the books. By the time I was 16, I was helping run the place like a partner. I didn't go to parties. I didn't date much, and I certainly didn't live like a typical teenager. I lived for that land. But while I was busy learning how to grow things and balance budgets, my younger sister Chloe was learning how to get exactly what she wanted without ever lifting a finger. Chloe was different. She was the golden girl, always dressed in designer clothes, even in the middle of a field. She had this ability to charm anyone, teachers' boys, our relatives, even Dad sometimes. But not Mom. Mom didn't need to be charmed. She already had Chloe on a pedestal from day one. See, my mother never really liked me. I don't say that lightly. She never said it out loud, of course, but she didn't have to. Her eyes said it when I tracked mud through the kitchen. Her voice said it when she criticized how I wore my hair, or told me I was too serious or not pretty enough. She made sure I knew Chloe was the daughter she was proud of. Chloe was delicate, artistic, carefree. I was practical, quiet, and dependable. Apparently, that made me boring and invisible. Despite that, I loved my father. He was the one constant in my life, the only person who saw me, really saw me. When we were alone, he'd say things like, "You're the only reason this ranch stays together, Mads, and one day, this place will be yours." And I believed him. I remember one evening we were fixing the irrigation lines covered in dirt and sweat, and he looked at me and said, "If anything ever happens to me, just know it's all written down. I made sure you're taken care of." I didn't ask questions. I just nodded, because I trusted him. But I had no idea that trust would be shattered so violently. When I graduated high school, I didn't leave Montana. I stayed and studied agricultural business at the local university, so I could still help out on the ranch. Meanwhile, Chloe moved to LA for fashion school. She posted pictures of brunches, beach parties, and shopping sprees while I woke up at 5 a.m. to feed livestock. And even though Mom acted like Chloe was the sun and moon, I kept working, kept showing up, because I believed deep down that doing the right thing mattered, that my loyalty would mean something. I didn't realize the game was rigged. Everything changed when my dad died suddenly of a heart attack. It was a bright morning. I'd made him coffee, just like always. He said he was feeling a little tired and sat down on the porch swing. He was gone before the ambulance even got there. The days after that were a blur of grief and funeral planning. I was in shock. But through it all, I held on to his words. "It's all written down. So I waited for the will, for the reading, for the proof that all those years of sacrifice hadn't been for nothing. But it never came. Mom sat me down a few weeks after the funeral, her voice calm but cold. She said, "There is no will. Your father must have never finalized it." Then, as if she were talking about the weather, she told me that Chloe would be taking over the house and the land. "It's better this way," she said. "You wouldn't have the time to manage it with your little job at the bank anyway." I felt like I'd been punched in the chest. I tried to fight. It demanded to see the paperwork, the deed, anything. But she refused. Said it was done. That Chloe was already moving back to help keep the family name alive. Just like that, everything I had ever known was taken from me. After Dad passed away, I expected heartbreak, but I didn't expect betrayal. Just days after the funeral, I asked Mom about the will. Her face went cold. "There isn't one," she said flatly, like it was no big deal. "Your father never finalized it." Then she added, "It's just simpler if everything goes to Chloe." At first, I thought she was joking. I laughed. Then I saw her eyes dry hard, unblinking. And I knew. She meant it. Everything. The ranch, the house, the vehicles, the land, was going to Chloe. The same Chloe who'd spent the last 5 years gallivanting across the country, jumping from one boyfriend to another, failing college classes, racking up credit card debt, and mocking everything about country life. The same Chloe who once called the ranch a hick prison. I was stunned. But I've lived here my whole life. I've helped run the place. Dad promised Mom cut me off. "It's done, Madison. It's time you figured your life out." Just like that, I was homeless. Not even allowed to stay in my own bedroom. Mom told me I could sleep in the guest house temporarily, but only if I paid rent. She even asked for a deposit. I left with a suitcase, a box of books, and my dad's old work gloves, nothing else. Chloe didn't even bother to come say goodbye. She was already planning a rebranding of the ranch for her influencer career. Apparently, Dusty Rose Ranch sounded cuter than Green Hollow Farms. The first night I slept in my car, parked behind a truck stop. The air smelled like diesel and regret. I held my phone and scrolled through photos of the ranch sunsets over the fields, my old horse Daisy Dad fixing a fence post. I cried so hard I thought my lungs would give out. The days after that were worse. I couch surfed when I could. I applied for jobs nonstop. Eventually, I picked up shifts as a barista in the mornings, a dog walker in the afternoons, and a janitor at night. I barely made enough to eat. I lost weight. My hair started falling out. I couldn't afford shampoo, let alone therapy. Meanwhile, Chloe turned the ranch into a party palace. She threw raves in the barn. She rode horses in bikinis for TikTok. She posted videos titled "How I Took Back My Life" and "Why I Cut Off Toxic People, Even If They're Family." In one video, she was standing on the porch of the house where I was born, sipping champagne and talking about cleansing the energy of the property. Every time I saw her face online, my stomach twisted. I wanted to shut it all off, but I couldn't. I watched everything, obsessively, like poking a bruise to see if it still hurt. Mom played right along. She became Chloe's assistant/manager. She handled brand deals and gave interviews to local news about how proud she was of her successful daughter. Me, I didn't exist anymore. It was like I'd been erased. Then one night, I got a message from an old neighbor. It was a link to a live stream. Chloe was hosting a Q&A, and someone asked about me. She laughed and said, "Madison, oh, she's off doing something. I think she works at a pet store. Or maybe she's a dog groomer. Anyway, we don't really talk to her anymore. Some people just don't vibe with your growth, you know." The comments filled with laughing emojis. I stared at the screen for a long time. I wasn't sad anymore. I was numb. But then something shifted. I started writing. Not just journaling, but documenting every transaction I'd made for the ranch, every receipt, every photo. I contacted a lawyer friend from college and asked about property law. I started researching land auctions, foreclosure proceedings, tax liens. I didn't know exactly what I was building, but I knew I needed it to be ready when the time came. Because deep down, I believed something Chloe wasn't smart. She was flashy. She loved clout. She loved money. But she didn't understand responsibility. And she definitely didn't understand business. So I waited. I worked. I learned. I got certified in real estate, took night classes in finance, saved every penny. I rented a tiny studio and stopped watching her videos. Not because I forgave her, because I was done wasting bandwidth on their nonsense. I was building something better. One day I ran into Chloe's old friend at a coffee shop. She looked tired, annoyed. "You haven't heard," she asked. "Your sister maxed out 3 credit cards and tried to take out a loan on the ranch. Got denied. She's freaking out. Your mom's trying to sell off land." That's when I knew. The time was coming. I thought I had hit rock bottom the night I slept in my car for the first time. But nothing prepared me for the months that followed. Months of cold nights, endless rejection, and a constant gnawing hunger that wasn't just physical. After losing my childhood home and the ranch that my family had nurtured for generations, I was nothing more than a ghost in my own life. My mom's betrayal stung deeper than any pain I'd ever known. She didn't just hand everything over to Chloe. She erased me from the family history like I never existed. I worked 3 jobs just to scrape by. Mornings were spent behind the counter at a greasy diner serving coffee and burnt toast to strangers who never cared about the shattered girl behind the apron. Afternoons, I was cleaning offices or walking dogs trying to earn a few dollars to buy ramen and apples. Nights were the hardest. I cleaned hotel rooms with aching hands and a bruised spirit fighting exhaustion that threatened to swallow me whole. I remember one night vividly. The wind was bitter and sharp, biting through the thin layers of my jacket as I sat on the cold asphalt of a parking lot. My old phone cracked, and flickering was all I had to connect me to the world I had lost. I scrolled through photos of the ranch, my sanctuary, my childhood, my entire identity. The green fields, the worn-out barn, Dad's old pickup truck, all stolen from me. I cried until I couldn't see straight. The isolation was suffocating. I hadn't spoken to Mom in weeks. Chloe, meanwhile, was living my dream, or what was supposed to be mine. Her social media was flooded with images of glamour and fun. I saw her laughing with friends on the porch I once called home, her fake Southern twang dripping with sarcasm as she mocked my old-fashioned ways. The ranch wasn't just a home to me. It was a legacy. Every fence post I fixed, every seed I planted, every hard day of sweat and blood, it all meant something. But to them, it was just a backdrop for Chloe's influencer fantasy. One day, I got a voicemail from Mom. Her voice was cold, distant. Chloe's invited some people over this weekend. You're not to come around Madison. This is her home now. I held the phone to my chest, feeling the weight of her words like a physical blow. I felt utterly alone. But even in those darkest moments, I refused to let the betrayal break me completely. I sought refuge in the small community that still remembered me. Old neighbors who had watched me grow up brought me meals or offered warm blankets. They whispered about how Mom and Chloe had changed since Dad died, how they'd lost their way. Slowly, I began to rebuild. I found a tiny room to rent from a kind elderly woman named Mrs. Carter. It was nothing fancy. A single bed, a cracked window, a tiny kitchenette, but it was a place to call mine. A place where I could cry without feeling ashamed. I kept working every day, pushing through exhaustion and pain. But the hardest part wasn't the physical hardship. It was the emotional weight of watching my family tear itself apart while I was cast out. I'd hear whispers at the local grocery store, seeing people side-eye me. Poor Madison, they'd say. Lost everything to her wild sister. I hated being pitied. I wanted justice, not sympathy. Then came the day when Chloe's partying crossed the line. A storm was rolling in thunder, rumbling in the distance as I drove by the ranch on my way home from work. The fields were flooded with headlights and music blasting so loud I could hear it from the road. Strangers in designer clothes stumbled across the land I'd once cared for. I pulled over heartbreaking. The barn doors were open and inside was chaos, a wild party with a DJ flashing lights and people dancing on tables. I watched as Chloe strutted through the crowd looking like she owned the world, but all I saw was a reckless girl playing with fire. Days later, the damage was clear. The fences were broken, the fields trampled, and the barn covered in graffiti. The ranch looked like a war zone. I wanted to scream. I wanted to fight, but I had no power, not yet. Then came the phone call that shattered what little peace I had left. It was the bank. The ranch was in foreclosure. Mom had been too busy throwing parties and signing deals to pay the taxes. The bills had piled up, interest climbing like a mountain, and the bank was ready to auction off the property. That's when I realized my family was burning down everything we built, and I was the only one who cared. I stayed up all night, pacing the floor of my tiny apartment, making calls, searching for solutions. I had almost no savings, but I had a plan. If I could raise enough money, I might be able to buy the ranch back at the auction. It was a desperate gamble, but I had to try. For weeks, I worked harder than ever, taking every shift I could, saving every penny. I reached out to old family friends, sold some of my belongings, and even took out a small loan. The night of the auction arrived. I dressed in my best, nothing fancy, but clean, and showed up with a pounding heart. As the bidding started, Chloe appeared wearing an expensive designer dress and a smug smile. She glanced at me like I was a joke, but I was ready. Bid after bid, I fought for what was mine. Every time Chloe raised her paddle, I raised mine higher. When the hammer finally came down, the auctioneer announced my name as the winning bidder. I felt a surge of triumph and relief. I was finally taking back control. But the victory was bittersweet. Chloe and Mom were stunned. They never expected me to have the guts to fight back. But I didn't want revenge, not in the way they thought. I didn't want to kick them out and burn bridges. I wanted justice. I gave them a chance to pay fair rent and respect the land. They hesitated, but eventually they agreed, and just like that, the tables had turned. I was no longer the homeless girl sleeping in her car. I was the landlord, the one who held the keys. And this time, I wasn't going anywhere. After the dust settled from the auction, I finally held the deed to the ranch and the mansion, two places that had once belonged to my family, but that my mother and sister had tried to erase me from. But owning the property wasn't the end of my fight. It was just the beginning. I knew that Chloe and Mom weren't going to vanish quietly. They still acted like they owned everything, acting entitled, throwing parties, and draining every last dollar from what they thought was theirs. I wanted to teach them a lesson, not by destroying them, but by making them realize the consequences of their greed and betrayal. The first step was to get serious about real estate. While living in that tiny apartment and working endless shifts, I took night classes to become a licensed real estate broker. I spent hours studying market trends, legal documents, and negotiation tactics. I had to be smart, strategic, and patient. Slowly but surely, I started buying up parcels of land around the ranch and the mansion. Every small plot I acquired felt like reclaiming a piece of my past and securing my future. I also researched the local housing market and found opportunities to increase the value of the properties by improving them or attracting new tenants. Chloe was still living the reckless lifestyle, unaware that her finances were crumbling. The parties she threw on the ranch became more chaotic and expensive. Her Instagram feed was full of extravagant events, but behind the scenes, bills were piling up and debts were mounting. Eventually, the foreclosure notice for the mansion arrived. I knew this was my chance. With the help of a few contacts I had made through my brokerage work, I prepared to bid on the mansion at the bank auction. It was nerve-wracking. Chloe had hired lawyers and tried to stall the process, but I was determined. I pooled every penny I had, took out a small loan, and bid confidently. When the hammer fell and the auctioneer declared me the winner, I felt an overwhelming mix of triumph and relief. But I didn't celebrate by kicking my mother and sister out immediately. Instead, I sent a letter explaining that from now on they would be tenants and that rent would be due monthly, fair market rates, with penalties for late payment. Their reaction was priceless. Mom called me begging for mercy and understanding. Chloe was furious but powerless. For the first time, the roles had reversed. Over the next few months, I enforced the rental agreement strictly. Every late payment was charged with interest. Every damage to the property was billed. Chloe's wild parties ceased. They couldn't afford the fines. The mansion grew quieter, more subdued. Meanwhile, I kept expanding my real estate portfolio. I bought neighboring properties, fixed up old barns and cabins, and leased them to reliable tenants. My business grew, and I finally started to feel a sense of control and accomplishment. But it wasn't just about money. I wanted my family to understand what it felt like to lose everything they took for granted, to feel the weight of responsibility and the sting of consequence. One evening, Mom showed up at the mansion, tears in her eyes, asking for forgiveness. She wanted to mend our fractured family and start fresh. I listened, but I knew the wounds ran deep. "You chose Chloe over me," I said quietly. "Now, I'm giving you a chance to respect what we have left. But this time, it's on my terms." I refused to let the past define me anymore. I had fought hard, suffered deeply, but I was no longer the powerless daughter. I was the woman who reclaimed her legacy, who made sure justice was served in the only way that mattered. In the end, I didn't want to destroy my family. I wanted to rebuild it, stronger and fairer. And for the first time in years, I felt hopeful. Months passed since I took control of the ranch and the mansion. The house that once symbolized betrayal had now become a place of quiet reflection. Chloe and Mom lived there under my terms, and for the first time, I saw change not just in their behavior, but in myself. One evening, Mom came to the door, her eyes swollen from crying. She begged for forgiveness, for a second chance to be part of my life. I felt the old anger rise, the hurt from years of neglect and betrayal. But I also saw something new, remorse and maybe even hope. I looked her in the eyes and said, "You chose Chloe over me when it mattered most. You erased me from our family's story. But I'm willing to believe in forgiveness only if it means respect, honesty, and love from now on." She nodded, tears streaming down her face. That moment wasn't about winning or losing, it was about healing. Chloe too softened. The wild party stopped. She began to take responsibility, working to pay her rent and repair what she'd broken, not just the house, but our family bond. As for me, I finally felt peace. The years of struggle, the pain of betrayal, and the fight for justice had shaped me into someone stronger and wiser. I wasn't just the girl who lost everything. I was the woman who took back her life on her own terms. Sometimes karma isn't about revenge. It's about rising, reclaiming, and forgiving yourself enough to move forward. And that was the greatest victory of all.